What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Therapist Logan Reacts. Today we are doing another chapter in the chapter series with Ren, the artist. Let's jump right into it and get after it.
I'm going to try and hold it together throughout this one.
Hold together. It's going to be a rough one, isn't it?
2015 was the worst year of my life. At the end of 2014, I attended a private UK-based ME specialist clinic called Breakspear. For some reason, the treatments had sent my health nosediving, and I became more sick than I'd ever been. I became so weak that I couldn't walk to the bathroom without needing to lie on the floor to recover. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't read. I couldn't watch TV. All I could do there was lie there in pain. It was obvious during this time that I needed to move back home with my mum again. She moved to Cardiff with a new husband, and they had a spare room, which became my tomb for the next 8 months. At this point, I was so weak that the most that I could manage to do a day was to take a shower. The rest of the time I was confined to my bed. I started reacting even more severely to foods, so every single meal had to be blended into soups or broths to avoid negative reactions. Pain constantly shot through my shin bones and through my feet, like splinters. My stomach would gurgle, and the muscles in my body would constantly twitch, spasm, and ache. My body felt drained of every single ounce of life, and I was so tired, but I was too wired to sleep. I was so full of mental fog that reading a single page on a book seemed impossible. The daylight coming in from behind the curtain hurt my eyes. Loud sounds felt overwhelming.
This just sounds absolutely horrendous. Looking at it, the thing that jumps out to me is he said reading a single page out of a book just seemed impossible just due to the brain fog alone, and it makes sense when you think about how the brain reacts, and in that current state in that day and time, his brain is processing all this pain that he's feeling all throughout his body, the pain and splinters in his shins, to again just like the uneasiness he feels in his stomach, to literally every other symptom that he has, the feeling of pain and just nausea and everything else, is literally the only thing the brain could simply focus on. And when the brain is so overwhelmed like that for so long, in his case, it's just beyond. It's like it comes down to just like focusing on just processing that pain, because there literally is no energy or no power to do anything else. So, and it sucks when the brain's overwhelmed like that. And God, I just feel for him too, because that can be such a negative cycle kind of to be in. Again, having the biological aspect break down as well as the psychological breakdown. It makes sense of how it's happening, but that can be such a rough cycle for individuals dealing with this, as well as anything similar to this, that it's again just a breakdown of your body, and your brain is just zero unforgiving in any aspect alone.
All I could do was wait and pray for sleep, knowing that when I woke from it, nothing would change. I wouldn't feel in any way rested, and all the symptoms would persist. This went on and on and on. It was day after day of physical and mental torture. I thought of concentration camps, of prisoners of war being tortured. At least the escape of death seemed likely. During that time, I never got breaks. My whole body burned. My brain was on fire, and I had nowhere to hide. In the merciful moments where I could concentrate, I tenaciously trawled the internet, looking for ways out. My research drew me to a procedure called a fecal transplant that was having success managing things like Crohn's disease or colitis. It also gained success in some select cases of autoimmune conditions like MS2. At the time, I felt like much of my issues were caused by dysbiosis, which means an imbalance in your gut flora. I noticed that all the food intolerances started after a large course of antibiotics for the parasite. I wondered if the parasite had wreaked havoc on my microbiome before I nuked it with antibiotics that worsened it further. Fecal transplants can introduce a whole host of probiotic bacteria into your gut, and it can re-establish a healthy homeostasis. In normal person speak, I wanted to pay to put another person's poop in my butthole. I carried on filming videos from my bed, blogging my experience. I was pretty convinced that during this time I wouldn't be alive much longer, and part of me wanted there to be some kind of document of what I'd been through in hopes that it might help someone later down the line.
And if this illness does kill me, then I want this video. I want somebody who can take notice of this video and do something with it.
I had a fundraiser open to save money for the fecal transplant, which was very slowly creeping up. I needed to save $6,000 in total. I remember my girlfriend wanting to come and visit, but telling her that I didn't want her to. There are a few reasons for this. One, I was pretty sure I was going to die soon. The day before Joe died, I'd been sat with him at a pub, catching up, playing pool, cracking jokes. I'd often wondered if I'd have been hit less hard by his death if I'd been away at university when it happened. For my girlfriend's sake, I wanted her to have distance from me.
So this is a thing that kind of occurs, especially when it comes to, again, being in a depressive state. And again, he's being realistic. He truly believed that he was going to pass and be no longer with us. Fully understand that. It's understandable based on his story, you know, like just not wanting to have that connection and having that memory and the deep interaction the day before Joe passed away hits him a little bit harder. So he's reflecting on that. And it sounds like he says, if I was at university, I may not have had that connection. That is very true. He probably would have taken Joe's death a little bit later. But if you look at it, like, what makes him, like, I'm curious about, I think it's just the pain overall. And again, he's dealing with the physical pain as well as the grief and mental pain that's just constantly being added to it. So I understand like his avoidance when it comes to that. And again, just looking out for others. But when it comes to depression, we typically have these things of pushing away our social supports due to not feeling like a burden, or again, being a burden in this sense, because he said that he doesn't want to have like a good, he didn't want to have the great memories with Joe prior because the death seemed that much harder. So if he had his girlfriend came, visited him, and he had this positive, great reactions, he would think that once he passed, she would have to take away that weight and that guilt and that frustration and that anger and everything else that comes along with grief. And I get it. It's understandable. I see it very much so. But depression, in this sense, like, again, it's being cautious of when you're pushing away your supports, the ones you love that are, like, have your back and through thick and thin kind of thing. Just be cautious of that. That's a self-awareness thing, that it's difficult to be in these situations and think of others because, again, you, like, having go through that, you can make the decision to do it or not do it. I'm not saying you can't or you should always let your supports be there. Ultimately, it's your decision at the end of the day. But it's okay to question yourself. Why am I pushing my resources and supports away? You know, it's just something to reflect on, for sure. And it just seems to be that's what he's doing here. And a lot of the time, that is the case when you're kind of at your wit's end. You don't really see much future. So it's understandable.
I also felt ugly. I felt unlovable. I was unable to communicate. And I didn't want her to see me like that. I watched my mum look thinner and more frail every day that she had to watch her son deteriorate. And I felt immense guilt. My mum would often walk in and find me either crying on the bathroom or kitchen floor, having no energy to get back into bed. She'd often sit with me and massage my feet, which always hurt. And she'd hum melodies to me like she would do when I was a little boy. During this whole time, I hadn't picked up my guitar. I barely had any sunlight touch my skin, and I lost a lot of weight. I was about 130 pounds at my lowest, about 8 or 9 stone, which for someone who is 6'1" is very skinny. My average weight is usually about 168 pounds, 12 stone. Every day the same thing. I'd wake up in pain, eat a meal of blended vegetables and chicken, lie with my eyes closed for hours while the world seemed to spin erratically, and I'd often cry as the bones in my legs felt like they wanted to grow out and burst out of my skin. Despite this, what I didn't know is things were about to get a lot worse.
Get a lot worse. Good lord. And the fact that he's still chugging along today is just, God, it's motivating. Like, and how raw is this, like, these chapters? Like, I understand why you guys pushed for these so heavily. Like, just how raw and uncut and just who he was and just, like, his experiences and just what he's gone through is just remarkable. Like, to, like, in the sense of just being completely vulnerable in front of thousands of people, you know? It's just, it's wildly to take, like, it's sometimes, you don't always have to do this, but I feel like a lot of people, and we see things where we take negatives and turn it into a positive, but sometimes just having that negative for yourself can just be fine. Like, you don't always have to turn it into something else for others. And so it's just beautiful that he's taking something so tragically horrifying and absolutely horrendous and really just, again, giving it back, when, again, he didn't need to. There was no known person telling. It's just, again, just the selflessness that kind of comes out. Like, that's another keyword that kind of comes to me when it comes to him.
Come June, I've been in bed for about 6 months straight. I've regained some energy to leave the house every now and then to go shopping for groceries with my mum, and I've finally reached my target for the fecal transplant, and my mum drove me to the clinic to get the procedure. Everything seemed to go as smoothly as it could for such a bizarre experience. I received a colonic irrigation, which was like a car wash for your colon. Actually feels pretty good. They then proceeded to put someone else's excrement in my behind. They would repeat this process for 5 consecutive days. When I got home, I realised I felt a little odd, almost manic, and I was hopeful that this meant my energy was coming back. But it wasn't a nice feeling. As the days progressed, I started to feel an innate sense that something was very wrong. It seemed my immune system was going into some sort of overdrive. My brain was buzzing, and the more time that passed, the more uncomfortable I felt. I remember early one morning, I was lying on the kitchen floor after attempting to get a glass of water. My body hurt so much that I was digging my nails into the laminate flooring, screaming, and my mum ran in and asked me what was wrong. I remember repeating, "I don't want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want to go," over and over again. I felt myself falling down a deep tunnel in my mind, almost as though my entire soul was tumbling down into an abyss. When I finally crashed to the bottom, I was hit with this immense feeling of stillness and peace. I stopped crying, I sat up, and my mother looked at me, puzzled. I have not felt to this day that sort of serenity that I felt in that moment. I looked around the room and everything seemed to have gained a clarity and quality, but what was most peculiar was the feeling of stillness. There seemed to be some sort of respite from the mental torture and fog in my brain. I still to this day have no explanation for what happened. I looked at my mum, I smiled at her calmly, and I told her that everything was okay now. Her partner Michael came in, and I remember them both looking at me, perplexed. I started speaking fluidly for the first time in months, but it wasn't quite me. I was cracking jokes, being witty. My mum would laugh nervously. I remember feeling as though I was coming up off an ecstasy pill. I felt this underlying feeling of euphoria. I caught myself occasionally erratically snapping my fingers or making whistling noises in between sentences, or staring at some empty part of the room as though there was somebody there, then snapping back to the space and talking to my mum. This feeling of intense euphoria lasted about 48 hours. During this time, I'd adopted some newer strange behaviours. Everything in my room that wasn't parallel bothered me, so I had to make sure it was aligned and facing the same direction. The whistle and the finger click became a new tick, and it started rising in frequency the more time that elapsed. I also noticed that I get stuck on words or sentences when talking to my mum. For example, if I was saying a sentence like, "I'm not sure how I'm feeling today," I would sometimes get stuck on the whole sentence or just a word from it and repeat it about 30 or 40 times before I could move on to the next. So I'm not sure how I'm feeling today, feeling today, feeling today, 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 over and over. I can't really explain why, but it's like saying it carved out a safe space for me. After about 2 days, that feeling of peace and euphoria was swapped out for a feeling of immense dread and doom. I felt fear fill my body, unlike any fear that I've ever felt. I'd often wake up in the early hours of the morning screaming at the top of my lungs, a torture scream that would fill the whole house, a scream like my legs were being sawn off. I felt pure terror. My mum would run in and try and calm me down. Sometimes I'd be thrashing, hitting the mattress, pounding the walls. It usually ended up in me exhausting myself and her stroking my head in her lap as I sobbed and repeated the same words over and over again. Everything in these moments terrified me. The compulsion to make everything parallel became a necessity. Whenever I was in the kitchen or car and the dials were facing the wrong way, it taunted me. My mum started taking me to a weekly talk therapist in hopes it would stop me from killing myself. I did catch myself researching.
So it's interesting that, again, the things that stuck out to me is, again, that idea of euphoria, that this manic state it seems that he has been in, and to be filled with that immense dread and doom he was talking about is something accurately explored with, and I don't know, it just pushes me to the idea of like bipolar. And again, I know that this is a very intricate state, so me as a therapist, I would not diagnose him by any means in any capacity just based on that just alone, but it's like just pointing the symptoms out run very parallel with some of those kind of things. So I would definitely be like exploring some kind of components there just to see what it is. I know that there's, again, a physical and a biological component, which again adds another factor for therapists to kind of explore. And again, we have clinical expertise, but we do not have like medical background, like, you know what I mean? Like, we're not doctors. We don't know those diagnoses. We know diagnoses in the DSM-5, and that kind of limits our scope of practice. So that's just what it kind of jumped to me. So again, I mean, I'm glad he's able to go get a talk therapist, but it could be very different. And it seems like there was some OCD tendencies that kind of came along with that. Again, the parallelness, the things needing it to be a certain way, for it to make sense and feel like he wasn't being taunted. I wonder if there's something deeper there, and hopefully this talk therapist explores that, because it's interesting because he seems like he's become in an irrational state of mind, but in that irrationality, there's a rational component that makes sense to him. And I think a therapist is really important to explore those components, as something makes sense to them, even if it's not making sense to us. Why is it making sense to you? So that's something, a question I think therapists can act as, because we deal with individuals who have certain thoughts, certain processes, certain expectations, focuses, more like everything that makes who they are. And it's important for us to recognize why it makes sense to them, how it makes sense to them, and then kind of go from there. Because the more information we have in that component, the more that we can kind of see and adapt our type of therapy to that individual to explore those certain things. So that's definitely where I hope this therapist would be going. We'll see, though, as I know he hasn't had the best luck with therapists.
Therapist in hopes it would stop me from killing myself. I did catch myself researching the most painless ways to do it. I often daydreamed about death, and it made me feel at peace. At this point, intense paranoid delusions started creeping in. I wondered if what was happening to me was demonic. I don't remember how I got there, but I remember one time speaking on the landline to someone who claimed to be an expert in dark magic. He told me that being around my mum was bad for me. He told me that she was bad. He told me that I needed to do a ritual with black wax candles in order to free myself. I remember ordering black candles from eBay, and when they arrived I had a change of heart, and I decided against doing this dark magic ritual. I fell asleep that night, and I woke up the next day to find the candles totally melted onto the white mantelpiece that they were on. They'd never been lit. I still don't really know for certain if anything of these things happened, but the melted wax was definitely real. I remember picking it off with my nails. There were moments that my rational mind knew that I was hallucinating. Sometimes in the night I would hear perfect string quartet symphonies with no sound source for them to be coming from. I remember one time my mum took me with her to the post office because during this time I'd rarely been left in the house alone. I remember the lady behind the till reaching for some sellotape. As she tugged on the tape, it sounded as though it had been amplified 1,000 times. It was deafeningly loud, I ran out of the store crying and shaking, and I sat in the passenger seat of my mum's car, rocking back and forth, where she found me uncontrollably sobbing, repeating the words, I can't, I can't, I can't, I can't, I can't, over and over again. My paranoia grew. I boomeranged between thinking I may have been latched onto by some demonic entity, and I became suspicious of even my own family, to thinking I might be part of some sort of twisted experiment, where a group of observers were seeing how far they could push me before I snapped and shattered.
So again, here it comes. Again, similar to what I was saying earlier, this idea of this irrational mind, but it's based in rational thought. This happens a lot. I've recognized this. I've worked with individuals whose all perception of reality and their perspective is just extremely irrational. It doesn't make sense, but to them there was a rational explanation for it. It's just like getting I think a good therapist is trained in trying to explore that underlayer and understanding how it's supported, even if it doesn't. Again, it's not going to make sense to us per se. And then, like, you know what I mean? Like, we may be able to logically explain something, but recognizing maybe why that truth is so true to them. Again, with Ren not being specifically religious, but now his irrational brain is trying to make sense of something he can't make sense of. So it's going to like the far ends of the spectrum, the far corners that are his mind. And it's not saying he doesn't not believe, but he just never felt religious. And again, just him being able to kind of come up with, oh, this has to be it. Like, if the things I've tried to explain before just aren't working, it doesn't make sense. So maybe I got to go even further to my like outside, like the outliers, you know? So I wonder if that's kind of like a component or a dynamic that's occurring here.
My irrational mind concluded that if I start behaving in unexpected ways, I might confuse the people conducting this experiment, and they'd shut it down. I'd sit in my own bed manically grinning in response to the jolt of pain in my legs. I'd say things to Mum and Michael which made no sense at all. This all seemed to be leading up to a very unusual day. I can't quite recall the details of how it happened because it was quite tricky to tell what was reality and what was not. But from what I remember, I was in the car with my mum, parked outside a supermarket, and I'd put my laptop on the roof of the car while I'd helped her with groceries. I'd forgotten it was there and she drove off. It wasn't until about an hour later I noticed and I started panicking. My laptop had on it hundreds of songs from my time in Brighton. It was all I had really to show for my life. I was already in such an emotionally fragile space that losing that felt like some sick, torturous joke. We drove back and searched every place it could be with no luck. As we were driving home, my mum pulled up at a junction and something in me snapped. I got out of the car and I ran away from it. I convinced myself this was still part of the experiment, because what else could explain that sort of luck? Once I got far enough away, I proceeded to strip off all my clothes, and I lay in the middle of a road staring up at the sky, laughing in hysterics. This was the opposite of how one should react to losing their computer, and so it seemed like the perfect way to confuse my observers. With time, the police showed up, as did my mother. By some miracle, she convinced them not to take me in or section me. And by a further miracle, they also relayed to my mum that a dented laptop had been handed in an hour earlier. I took this as meaning my experiment had worked. I eventually snuck off as my mum was talking to them.
Ooh. So, where was it? So I took this meaning as my experiment had worked. So this is something I deal with as a therapist, and I know a bunch of my colleagues and my friends that are therapists also have dealt with this, is having clients use kind of self-serving or confirmation biases. Again, this is just like a very ironic thing that happened for him, and like using it as evidence to kind of thing. Like, that's not something that would happen all the time, but it's like, again, you're using it to evidence and support something that's there. It's not connected or like at all. Like, it's not causal, but they're using it as causal evidence. It's not even correlational, you know? So it's just like, it's a really difficult thing to explore. And especially as a therapist, it's really difficult to challenge because you don't have another reality where you can utilize that and explain why that kind of worked out. So it can be really difficult. and a potential barrier for future therapists when you're dealing with individuals who use that kind of confirmation biases to again support their irrational thought processes and perspectives.
This is meaning my experiment had worked. I eventually snuck off as my mum was talking to them. I wandered slowly around this unfamiliar village until I encountered the second angel I would meet in my life, this time in the form of a black homeless man. I'm not sure how we got there, but as I was walking, I turned to my side and a man dressed in tattered grey clothes was walking beside me. He asked me what was wrong, and I explained the best I could the events of the day. I explained that I'd been sick a very long time, that I was tired, so tired, and that I just wanted to be better. The homeless man paused. He put his hand on my shoulders and he stared into my eyes. His eyes had a light grey tint. They were almost white, and something about his presence made me feel incredibly safe, incredibly still. He smiled, a kind smile, and he said to me, "Everything's going to be okay, Ren." And then he vanished. I hadn't told him my name. I never hallucinated anything after that day. I have no real explanation for that day. I chalk it down to a psychotic episode or stress-induced hallucination.
That's kind of where I was going to go with that. I mean, it makes sense when your brain is so stressed and it can do kind of intense things. You know what I mean? Like our brain's capable of distorting any one of our senses. So when it's in pain and just incredible stress for so long, there could be a component where it like short circuits or short wires. And again, just being in that, it can again create these ideas. Sometimes it struggles of again blending reality versus creativity, and with that, it's difficult. And again, that stress induced hallucination is kind of just it seems to be right on par, kind of where my brain was at. Just again with how much stress and how continuous it's been. Um, it's just like his brain was tired and kind of gave up. It's like if you don't sleep for multiple days, that's what happens. Your brain starts shutting down all your other organs and whatnot. Um, so it just seems to be like that, just mental fatigue and uh, just unbalanced brain activity.
But the events which followed put a lot of questions in my mind. What he said to me was very simple, but also very needed. I realise a lot of people might hear these stories and just presume I'm a bit mad, a bit weird, like I do when people tell me their ghost stories. All I can do is tell you my experience and let you derive your own conclusions from it. Anyway, I got home and I started to obsessively research ways to escape this new seemingly psychotic space I was in. It's a strange thing to describe, but it was like me, Ren, was in the passenger seat of my mind while some other entity was steering the ship. I was watching myself do things like scream at night or repeat words over and over, and I think to myself, damn, that's pretty crazy. But I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Every now and then I had moments of lucidity where I was more in control. I was doing things like stimming. I had night terrors, vocal tics, I'd stutter and I'd stammer. And for me, a lot of that lined up with some sort of transitory or stress-induced autism. I'd known a family with an autistic teenager, and some of the behavior...
I've never heard of this. I'm not going to tell him that that's incorrect or anything. Again, I'm open-minded when it comes to, like, you know what I mean? Like, the brain is so capable of so many different things that I'm not going to deny that this is a thing. Like, yes, it may be highly unlikely, but I'm also not going to tell him that his reality is just like incorrect. That's not what a good therapist does. It's okay to challenge certain aspects and certain thought processes, but again, like I've never heard of this dynamic occurring before. But just because I've never heard of it doesn't mean that's the truth. I'm not a perfect. I don't know everything in the clinical therapeutic world, and I sure as hell don't know anything in not very little in the like doctoral field when it comes to this kind of stuff and what can onset certain different components. I'm still learning. I'm still growing each and every day. And again, I don't even have it perfectly figured out yet. I'm never ever gonna pretend like I do. So I've never heard of that leading to like an autism aspect or symptomology. But again, That's interesting. It's an interesting perspective and perception that he had at this moment.
Tics, I'd stutter and I'd stammer. And for me, a lot of that lined up with some sort of transitory or stress-induced autism. I'd known a family with an autistic teenager, and some of the behaviours seemed to line up, which led me to a new pathway of online research. I came across this support group for a subset of children with autism called PANDAS, PANDAS. It was believed that these kids had the neurological infection of the streptococcus bacteria that was causing these autistic-like behaviours. I was presenting with some similar behaviours. These kids would do long courses of antibiotics and their symptoms would diminish or disappear, and they'd be seemingly normal children again. I speculated that the fecal transplant introduced a whole host of new bacteria into my gut, but that I didn't have the immune regulation to be able to control it, and it had sent my entire system into some sort of inflammation overdrive. I researched the most effective antibiotic for streptococcus, one being penicillin, and I convinced my mum to take me to the doctor, where I faked a stomach bug. I lied to him, and I said I'd had similar things in the past, and that penicillin cleared it right up. He reluctantly prescribed me a 2-week course of antibiotics because I was so persistent. I got home and I started the course. Initially I felt fucking awful, somehow even more tired than usual, and then towards the end of the course I noticed a definite shift in my energy and comfort. By the end of the course, my psychotic behaviours had disappeared and my energy felt a lot better. I stayed indefinitely on various herbal antibiotic supplements like oregano oil at this time, having learned that this was also active against certain pathogenic bacteria. Keep in mind also, I'm just going off script right now, keep in mind if I'd have followed the advice of most of the doctors that I'd seen at the time who were talking to me about my psychotic behaviours, I would have probably been put into a mental facility and medicated with medication that I didn't need and would have probably gotten a lot worse. So it was very lucky that I took no one tells you that antibiotics can treat psychosis, and these antibiotics did actually treat my psychosis. And I was no stranger to the placebo effect. I'd taken everything, it wasn't placebo.
I think it is, he may be accurate in that statement, that if he were to follow that, it may have led to that facility. And again, just based on the different components alike, I think his experience is very unique. I know a lot of people identify going through similar things, but again, his component, his biology, his psychology, like all those dynamics are very unique to him, and they're unique to every individual aspect. So again, just I understand that he's gone through terrible therapists, terrible doctors, just terrible kind of across the board in the UK. So it really seems like they got a little stepping up to do, and I really hope that they're on the come up since then and some progress. But again, there's nothing wrong with advocating for yourself and going for that. I'm all for that. Just recognizing that this is very individualistic to them. And again, I get it, the drive and the need to, the desire to lie in the sense of getting something that he thinks will again help him, because again, doctors have failed him so consistently in the past. I get it, the desperate feelings that kind of come along with that, completely understandable. I get it. I'm not going to, as a therapist, I'm going to understand and feel for him for sure. But I'm never going to recommend that. I'm not agreeing with that. Like, hey, you should do this if you feel like you, again, like I don't want to be the person that's like, again, trust the professionals. Again, the professionals have failed him. Professionals, there's always a chance professionals have failed you. If they fail you time and time again, advocate for yourself and explore safe exploration, things that can help you for sure. And I'm all for that. It's just, again, I want to really take the time and identify that this instant and experience and outcome is very individualistic to Ren. And I just don't want people utilizing it as like, oh, now I can kind of do whatever, you know what I mean? Just like take it along and just take it to the other end of the spectrum kind of thing. So just recognizing that that's them, and and you watchers, this is like your own life's your own, and I get that. So just again, just being aware of that, because I know identifying with and feeling like you're advocating for yourself can be difficult, but and just identifying with other individuals who have also have extremely difficult lives
against certain pathogenic bacteria. Keep in mind also the advice of most of the doctors that I'd seen at the time who were talking to me about my psychotic behaviors. I would have probably been put into a mental facility and medicated with medication that I didn't need, and would have probably gotten a lot worse. So it was very lucky that I took no one tells you that antibiotics can treat psychosis, and these antibiotics did actually treat my psychosis. And I was no stranger to the placebo effect. I'd taken everything, it wasn't placebo. It didn't matter. After about a week, I'd finished the course, and some of my more familiar symptoms like fatigue and pain started creeping back again. But that didn't matter, because what this whole experience had taught me was that the origin of my sickness was in fact bacterial, and it was pathogenic. The biggest thing it taught me was I could actually do something about it. I was no stranger to the placebo effect after years of trialing different drugs and supplements. This wasn't placebo. I took to the internet again and found a world-renowned specialist over in Brussels who was also leading a lot of the cutting-edge research for ME. I got on the phone and made an appointment. He was booked up for the next 9 months, but that gave me enough time to save money. The antibiotics and new herbs I was taking had also given me a new lease of life, and the hope for a cure made me more determined than ever. I started having enough energy to go on walks, which was huge for me at the time. My dad would drive over to my mum's and we'd go out in the car, and I'd take photos of wildlife on beaches.
That's awesome. That again, that newfound hope is really again energizing and getting some of those key aspects, and he's having those again social interactions of going out, doing things they like, and again just the therapeutic aspect of it, of what it can do, and just hope is so strong one way or the other. So it's just really cool that he was able to get some back.
I was picking up my guitar again after months in bed. I eventually invited my girlfriend over and made the decision to move back to Brighton as soon as I was strong enough to. It was around this time that I started working on the album Freckled Angels. I knew that the future tests weren't going to be cheap. I pulled together some old tracks from the days I was working with Sony, and I got hold of Eric and asked his permission to release them, which he graciously granted, so thank you, Eric. I then pulled together some newer material and compiled my first ever album from my bedroom. In those days, I had no real way of promoting myself and no energy to do shows, so it was mostly to be listened to by my friends and family. I named the album Freckled Angels after Joe. Joe was covered head to toe in freckles, and it seemed fitting to dedicate this work to one of the coolest and funniest people I ever knew. Any ounce of energy I did have from my limited reserves, I'd pour into recording that album. It's by no means a work of art, and it's a bit thematically disjointed, but some songs like Crutch or Pocket Full of Pain went a long way to photographing that time. I'm going to leave you with a recording of Pocket Full of Pain. Back in those days. Enjoy. Cool.
All right, so that concludes chapter 6. A lot of ups, or a lot of downs. Sorry, very very minimal ups. Again, Brussels guy sounds a lot of hope, a lot of big components, and again a lot of trust in humanity again, and trust in his journey, which is beautiful. It's again a beautiful transcendental action and belief. You know, that's really difficult to have after having such negative interactions, experience the whole lot, you know. So let me know down in the comments what you think about chapter 6. I know a lot of people were talking about this is very important to them, and I see why. Again, all of these chapters are just hitting so incredibly hard, and just again makes me feel so much more for Ren. And I love that I'm learning more about them, and I completely understand why you guys again have pushed for the chapters and the reaction to the chapters so strongly from a therapist's point of view. But yeah, just comment down below what you think. Make sure you give this video a like, and make sure you're subscribed too. We are moving headway, and we got a little bit more to go to hit that 1,000 subscribers, and then I'm gonna drop a video for you guys, kind of just talking about like me and my journey as well. So let's get to 1,000 subscribers. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next video. I am going to record Freckled Angels or Pocket Full of Pain right after this. So go check that out. That'll be out this Wednesday. So make sure you subscribe so you get that, so you see that video. Catch you next video. Thank you.